Hello.
Oh, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you tonight?
I'm good. Just a little bit late.
That's not bad. It's not bad at all.
Nah, not as bad as I thought when I kept hearing him stir and staying awake.
Yeah. When you said I'm going to be a little bit later, I'm like, and then you're like, it'll be like 15 minutes. I was like, I think that's normally the amount of heads up time you give me.
Yeah, it just came through. I'd send it later than I normally would.
I did notice that, but I was like, well, I haven't been like, I don't know. I feel like sometime between 9 and 9:30, you'll send me a message or whatever.
Yeah, typically.
So I felt like it fit.
I was also, while I was waiting for everything to settle, I was troubleshooting the recreation of my logging stack, and I think I finally pinpointed where the error is. I just have to fix it tomorrow.
You mean an error in the logging stack or an error in the network?
In the logging stack, in my redeployment of it. Yeah.
I found the error in the thing that tells me where the errors are. I have I got my replacement Amplify HD router, and it's up and running.
Nice. Did you get the other one set up as a mesh point?
Oh, no, not yet.
No. Okay.
I'm looking at it right now, though. It's sitting here on my desk.
It's at least a nice looking clock.
Mm-hmm. It's a lovely clock. So, we have a little follow-up.
I saw that.
Yeah, I happened to come across some stuff this week. Actually, it happened. I came across it yesterday. I got my monthly email about, you've done all the compliance things or whatever. And there was one about diversity and something. I don't recall the full title of the training, but it was a really good training, something or another.
It's diversity, equity, and inclusion, I believe.
It's always diversity, equity, and inclusion, because those are all, those things go together. We want to talk about those things. That's how we ended our last show. And so I just felt like they had a different name for it.
Could have. I know I completed mine, but I don't remember the title of the training program.
While I was working, I did mine yesterday, and I was just like, oh, this kind of makes sense for what we were talking about last week. I was like, how fortuitous that it came 1 week late. So anyway, it made me think about when speaking to people about racism and culture, point out that they also have a culture. Just because you're immersed in your culture doesn't mean you don't have culture. And you're as immersed in your own culture as somebody else who has a different culture than you is immersed in their culture. And they don't understand us much in the same ways that we might not understand them and their cultural influences. And then I just made a list of my cultural influences, which I thought was kind of interesting because I didn't think about what my, I don't know, I hadn't thought about what my cultural influences were. And so, I don't want to, it's interesting. I don't want to say there's white culture, because I don't think there is white culture other than maybe gender reveal parties, but
and pumpkin spice.
Pumpkin spice things. Yeah. But it's you have Irish culture, and you have Nordic culture, and you have Middle Eastern cultures, and you have Mediterranean cultures. And really the only folks that have culture based on their skin color are African Americans in the United States. Oh yeah, that was redundant. African Americans. And that's because all of their culture was stripped from them, and they don't know. But that's a whole other side tangent. But I thought about the things that sort of made my culture, and it's being a white cis male in the United States has some probably has a significant cultural influence on me. being a father, being a tech nerd, being an outdoor enthusiast. Those are all the things that like I identify with. I like want to be in those worlds. I, when appropriate, I use the lingo and the terminology that you would use. So, it's not just, an ethnic identity.
You could also say there's a American culture. It's just such a smorgasbord of other cultures thrown together that it's difficult to pick out what would be uniquely American.
Right.
And the main things that come to mind there are the focus on the self, right? The ambition and drive, and you can be whatever you want to be, hope or dream, so to speak, which breeds a number of other not necessarily positive things as well. When you have such a focus on the individual, there's whether intentional or not, there's a lack of focus on the group, the society as a whole. And that is, as far as I can tell, very uniquely American.
Yeah, I think so as well. I imagine you get some of that in Europe, but I really don't know. I can't say that I certainly have not. I don't know the various European cultures in the way, but the way that I would obviously understand American culture. But yeah, we are an individualistic society. We're a pick yourself up by your bootstraps and don't wait for somebody to help you. And there's a lot of positive aspects to that mindset, but it also is not without its drawbacks. Like my second point I was going to say is like accepting culture, accepting other folks' cultures don't make your own culture less important. And I put a sort of in there because if you think your culture is the only one that it has value and none of the others have value, then I guess it does make it less important because they all have value. The reality is they all have an equal amount of value and they're all important to ourselves to some degree or another. But
it's a very fascinating topic in general because you can really look at it from so many different levels, from the larger macrocosm, if you will, of society within the United States to the little pockets of diverse practices in different regions. And I feel like this is one of those areas where what I labeled a kind of foundational component of what I would classify as American culture, that focus on the self and the individual, is part of what breeds a misunderstanding of other cultures in the first place.
Agreed.
Because there's I kind of struggle with the way to phrase it. There's a bit of a focus on it's this or nothing else, driven from that individual perspective, and that's not the best way to summarize it. But that's kind of the roadblock.
I've read a number of articles and heard this reference before, and I sort of tried to hone this, like describing when self-reliance becomes toxic in nature, it sort of breeds this level of anti-intellectualism that's steeped in an attitude of somebody pointing out something different is the same as, oh, so you think you're better than me.
Yeah, I don't know that quite encapsulates it as well either, because a lot of it also stems from the fairly deep religious influence where aspects of other cultures don't adhere to the same rules. And so from that individualistic perspective, some of those things are just inherently bad. So I don't think it's necessarily always you think you're better than me. I think that's part of it. But I think part of it is also a lack of willingness to acknowledge that other cultures have other practices.
Well, that's certainly true. I can remember about 15 years ago, or a little more, around 15 years ago, I was hanging out with my friends at the time, and both of them were from New Zealand, and they were talking about how the United States is kind of like an island. Like, the United States has such a strong influence in media around the world that like Canada does not have nearly as much influence on us as we do on them, and the same with Mexico. Like our next greatest influencer is Europe, but we have generally been led to believe that Europe is communist. One, a lot of folks don't know what communism actually is, and two, it's this lie that's perpetuated because we think we're the best in the world.
And tagging on to that, it doesn't help that for the sorry that for better or worse, England was a predominant power and influencer prior to the U.S. fighting for its independence from England. And so most of what is taught or learned compares all of Europe to, or equates all of Europe to English rule. There's not a lot of exploration or understanding of other nations and how they go about things, except in foreign language classes.
Right.
And so your exposure to what the world stage as a whole really is comprised of relations between the United States, England, the former Soviet Union, and China, and then occasionally you have some conversation around Japan, mostly in the context of Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very narrow-minded view of anything other than those other countries that have had a fairly significant influence on U.S. development over the years. I can imagine that, I don't know, in another 15, 20 years, history might talk more about the Middle East and the influences on the United States as a result. But I'm not so sure, granted I haven't seen current textbooks, but I'm not so sure that's made its way into being a significant influence. And even then, it wouldn't be a focus on cultural aspects. It would be a focus on the acts of hostility or various aggressive stances between the countries. And there's just not a mass level exposure to other cultures at all throughout the majority of the education system in the United States.
Yeah, I'd like to take just a quick second to point out that English is also a foreign language.
Yeah, technically so.
Yes. Well, and the United States has no official language, so it's that's a whole other thing. But yeah, the sort of like, America was the melting pot of the world, because like everybody wanted to come to America. And so it's sort of a pro-American thing to be like, oh, I'm going to leave my culture so that I can come to America. And that's fine. There are good reasons to immigrate to places. I'm the son of an immigrant, but I feel like the attitude has changed into, if you want to continue to remember your culture, that somehow makes you slightly less American, and that's simply not the case.
I would actually say that it's changed a bit more along the lines of, if you're going to come here, act like one of us.
Yes.
And
speak American.
Yeah. And it's such a misguided view, but I can understand what it's born from, because we're far enough removed from being surrounded by influences that were different for the most part. You know, I guess that's technically not quite accurate. If you are not in a big city, then for the most part, you're not exposed to influences that are that dissimilar from your own most of the time. And as that has shifted and changed, where various groups of people have spread out from those epicenters into other areas, and there's more exposure to diversity in, I'm just going to say, more rural areas, and I'm not necessarily saying, middle of nowhere type rural areas yet. I don't think we're at that point. But those, as you get outside of those cities, you tend to find more clusters of people who spend their lifetime in the same area and don't move around or expose themselves to groups other than those groups they grew up with. And then you have someone who is different coming into that community, and there's no foundation or understanding from which to welcome that person and their differences. There's well, why did you come here if you didn't want to be like us? And I think that's the kind of subconscious force that created that mentality, more so than a willful intent. But that's the force that has to be combated. I think that makes sense. It made sense in my head, at least.
Yeah, I'm following. It also got me thinking about, it's a little bit slightly another sort of pillar of, not even sure what it's a pillar of, but I'll just throw the thought out there. And the university used to be a place of pretty liberal thinking, and I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know that the liberal thinking that you find in universities has necessarily changed, but universities have certainly changed in the past 20 years. They've become, the focus has gone from has shifted from education to running a business. Like the university has been businessified, and they're chasing the dollar because they need to. There's a great article in The Atlantic that discussed how universities have sort of backed themselves into a corner in this way, and it really, it hurt a lot of universities with the pandemic because of this shift in not having students enrolled and on campus. This past year has really been hard on a lot of universities financially. Some universities are closing. Universities are laying people off when they weren't necessarily, when they might not have needed to prior to the pandemic. And it's very possible that some of them are just they want to do these things and they're just blaming it on the pandemic. But it goes into, this article discusses like how universities are no longer this place that used to be a melting pot. Like, universities are a melting pot for sure. And we're not drawing in the talent that we used to draw from around the world. And it feels like having a highly ranked education system is not a priority in this country anymore. And that, I mean, the point of it was that lends itself to a reduction in the importance of valuing other cultures.
Yeah, it's possible that it goes a step beyond that as well. For the majority of universities, how much of their enrollment was that diverse to begin with? And so if there is a financial struggle, and so rising tuition costs have been an issue for years anyway, how much of it is just pricing out the ability for those who are more diverse to even consider it as an option, and couple that with the rising stature of other educational systems as legitimate options? Is it really worth it? You know, as long as most of your education translates into something where you would get equivalent credit here, then you really could spend most of your educational career elsewhere, transfer here, take a couple of classes instead of, you know, being enrolled for a multiple year degree, and end up in the same general state where there's just no reason to have that diversity on campus.
Yeah. It looks like you've got one group of people that were trying to increase diversity awareness, embrace diversity, and then a whole other group of folks that just want to like do the exact opposite.
It's a lot like our two-party system.
You know who
that one in?
No. Do you know who warned against a two-party system?
Was it Jefferson?
I was going to say that would be George Washington.
Okay. I knew it was among the founding fathers, but I did not know for sure if it was Washington or who.
Yeah, before he left office, he warned everybody in the government about a two-party system and the problems that it would lead to. And we, a couple hundred years later, still have a two-party system.
If I remember correctly, I'll have to go back and look, so I'll remember this as a piece of follow-up. But I think it was Andrew Hamilton also who warned that democracy would eventually fail. I'll have to find the quote as well, but I'll look for that. I'll remember that for follow-up for next week.
Yeah. I had one thing to say about education since we went down that tangent, and that is to say that education should be free, like on every level. Not just when you turn 18, you have to start paying for education. Like, it should be free. It should be free for all the citizens, and it should be expensive for the government, and we have the money to pay for it. We spend more on defense spending than like the next 26 countries combined. And 25 of those are our allies.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that should be free. I mean, if you really want to go down that path, there is absolutely no reason proper universal health care should not be something available to everyone.
Education, healthcare, the things that, I mean, it only makes society better. And, you know, like, there's so many people that are they want to argue, like, but we're not communists. Like, that's not a communist idea. You don't understand communism.
Yeah, I've had that argument a number of times. I'm going to blame the pervasiveness of Fox News for really hammering home the idea that any progressive socialist thinking immediately means communism.
Yeah. The best thing I saw this week in text on the internet was the idea what our parents' generation thought was going to rot our mind. They warned us that MTV was going to rot our minds, and it turns out that it's actually Fox News that's rotting their minds.
Yep, very much so.
Yeah. Should we chase this as a topic or talk about our topic?
I'm fine with either one. We mentioned at the end of the last episode that this topic would probably make its way into more than one show anyway. I have a feeling the next one will as well, and that they're going to be quite intertwined. So I'm up for either one. I'm game.
I'm not sure what I have else to say on this one, so I guess we should talk about law enforcement.
Well, before we do, I saw this nano topic eke its way into the notes, and there's no real detail. Is that something that we need to mention, or?
I mean, that could be after. That could be the after.
Okay.
It was just something I put in there because I was thinking about it, and it could be for an after. It could be for another show. It could be. It was just something like if I put it here and it doesn't make it here, then I'll copy and paste it to the next show notes.
Okay, well, I'm good with that.
That was my thinking.
So
do you like? I was just going to ask you. Do you like how I stylized that?
Yeah.
I had just been giving somebody some assistance understanding regex, so
I figured there had to be a little bit of a backstory.
That was all.
So the original planned topic for the evening was mentioned in the last show because we kind of had a brief blurb about law enforcement, or not actually law enforcement, but the police as a whole being a topic to discuss. And I had mentioned that there's a pervasive question that has to be answered before you can really talk about the ideas of police reform. And that question is, what exactly is the role of the police in the first place? Over time, many different roles have been ascribed to the job, but which ones actually make sense? And should there be more of a diversity of agency for some of these roles? And so the easier way to think of it is if you think of the police as they stand today, most people will go to law enforcement, criminal investigation, right? Those are kind of the big topics that people think of.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about the founding of the idea of a police agency, you have conflicting ideas across the board, because you have this idea of to protect and serve, or to be public servants and yet also a agency of authority. A lot of things that the police are called upon for would fall into the realm of the public servant category, providing aid and assistance, directing traffic, providing security, or a sense of security at least for events, things of that nature.
Yeah.
You also have something as simple as a vehicle broken down on the side of the road and a police officer providing, some visible deterrent for other traffic to not, mistakenly hit that vehicle. While in the case of, a vehicle having a tire blowout and they're waiting on a wrecker, it's not necessarily uncommon to see a police vehicle providing a warning signal that, hey, slow down, move over, that kind of thing, right? So the general topic is, what should the role of the police be? And this is not every agency, because there are specialized agencies for a reason. This is talking about the community to state level So local police, sheriff's department, state police. We can take it further, but the initial thought is, what is the role, or what should be the role of the police within the context of those agencies?
Yeah. So first thing I kind of want to put out there is like this idea of defunding the police. Like that was a thing that was kind of popular a year ago. People were saying defund the police. I get the sentiment there, and I agree with the sentiment, but like I want to just sort of focus on like the idea of defunding the police is probably not a good idea. But that's not that it's not that it can't work, because there are certainly places that did make that work. They actually defunded police departments. Sheriff departments took over certain aspects of that the police you were expecting the police to have their in their jurisdiction, and it actually did work. But I think the better sentiment is sort of to demilitarize the police, where there are certain circumstances when we're asking our police to do way too much. We're asking them to do way too much, and we're not paying them enough. And we're not training them enough. And so we create this... The word has escaped me. We create this environment. I'll go there. We create this environment that allows for deep and serious problems to become a part of the system. I'd say, for an example, if you had somebody that had some sort of mental handicap and they've become unruly, you might call the police, and the police show up. And now I understand, like, it might be important to have a police officer around for safety's sake, but it's not in their skill set to de-escalate perhaps a tense or emotional situation. And there's other people that are trained to do something like that, and they're not called upon when the police are called upon. And so I don't think we have enough variety and diversity in the training of our law enforcement officers for the things that we ask them to do.
So that's exactly what a lot of criminal justice education in the university realm discusses. And part of it is born from that scenario. Part of it is also from the criminal investigation standpoint. We talk about crime prevention quite a bit, and realistically, the police don't prevent crime. I mean, the statistics on it are fairly clear. There's a certain level of keeping honest people honest by having a presence of the police in general. But realistically, the role is not crime prevention, it's crime investigation. And even then, the success rate is a lot lower than you would expect. And part of that is driven from lack of resources and funding for some of the technologies that could assist. Some of it is just the nature of the particular crime in question. I'd have to go back and look at the actual numbers, but I actually had to write a handful of papers on the effectiveness of investigations for my master's. And it was pretty astonishing that it was a very high percentage of property crimes, for example, which are some of the more common, go unsolved. And unless there was an eyewitness or easily found and identifiable like DNA evidence or surveillance, it just that was it. There were no leads, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. Partly because there wasn't enough time available to those same officers to investigate it further compared to other more pressing offenses. And part of it is because of all of the other duties being asked by the same officers. And so part of the conversation there dove into, why do you have the same groups of people performing all of these different roles instead of having more specialized agencies for different components? And of course, if anyone knows enough about the way police departments are typically organized, I mean, you have specialized groups within the department that focus on an area, but that doesn't mean that they have 8 hours out of a day, to focus on one crime or investigation, or, a week to really dig into the details of one incident. When you think about the number of incidents that occur as opposed to the number of officers or investigators on staff, I mean, it's very much a resource constraint problem, which goes back to the concept of defunding not necessarily being the topic. It's using the funds in an appropriate manner where they are the most effective and address the biggest concerns. Buying a armored assault vehicle is probably not the best use of those funds, just as an example.
It's probably the most fun use of those funds.
Yeah. And I want to mention here, too, that does not mean that there should not potentially be an agency or a division that has more of a military focus for very specific use cases. I mean, there's a reason that, wasn't in the 80s that SWAT was really...
SWAT teams. I remember being a kid and being like, the SWAT team was like where it was at. Like, that is what if you were going to be, if we were going to play police, it's like, I'm going to be a SWAT team. I'm on the SWAT team.
I remember it being born out of, I think it was LA, where perpetrators had just far more firepower than the police. And so it's been a constant escalation on both sides, right? And that's obviously an issue, but that doesn't mean that every officer should be the equivalent of a SWAT officer riding around in a patrol vehicle. And one, they don't have the same training. Two, it's really not the best use of funds. I mean, I think that begins to open a rabbit hole that can go into a far more narrow topic. But it goes back to address the everyday role of a police officer is what? We've already mentioned a number of different things that we expect of them, and we know that we're not providing them with all of the resources to do those things. So if you were to take a step back and say, this is the realm of what the police do, where would you try to encapsulate that in a way that provides an avenue for other agencies to do what they do best, instead of trying to tack that on to the role of a police officer? For example, you mentioned the mental health scenario.
Yeah.
I see no reason whatsoever that you could not have an agency associated with police, fire, medical groups whose focus is strictly mental health. I mean, we have those professionals in clinical settings. Why do we not have the ability to send a professional on site to help de-escalate and control a situation with, a person who is mentally unstable?
I don't know. I mean, looking from the outside, it's like, well, whoever is benefiting most from the system wants to keep it exactly the way that it is, because it's benefiting them the most the way that it is right now. And to do something like this, might add a new level of oversight. It might take away a certain amount of power from that person. And I don't know if you know this, but like people, Americans, not a big fan of change. So,
yeah, I think it actually goes a step further. Going back to how we began the show, one of those things that is definitely American in sentiment is that most problems are things that you should be able to just pick yourself up and carry on. And I'll give an example. One of the things that I've heard in the past is, okay, you're depressed, get over it. Like, pick yourself up, continue on, smile, right? The idea is that you should be able to influence and control your mental state because of that misunderstanding that it is actually a medical issue in some fashion. It's just not a tangible medical issue.
well, I would even say it's just not tangible yet. You might, given enough time, we might say, oh, well, we do these things right here, and this is how you physically fix this problem. We're kind of getting there, but it's incredibly complex person to person. So for all intents and purposes, yeah, it's an intangible. It appears to be an intangible problem, much like, the comparable scenario would be like, well, your arm is broken. We'll just, set it and fix it. You should be able to do that on your own. You're good to go. But we all know that's ridiculous.
Yeah, but then you have stories about, Florida man or Ohio man, someone who does this random thing like punch a shark to get away, and then he's found drinking beers in a pub when the emergency personnel come to help,
There's a reason that story made it to, your ears, and it's because it's incredible.
Right. But the problem is that those types of sensationalist stories help breed this idea, or help continue to reinforce this idea that, well, if they did it, you should be able to. Because there's a focus on you should be able to do whatever it is that anybody else does. That's the American dream, right?
Yeah.
There's no concept of differences in individual capabilities with regard to that dream. It's all, if you put your mind to it, you should be able to do it. Which is why we, in a general sense, don't look at emotional or mental issues as things that should require assistance, when they absolutely should.
I think, something that also perpetuates it is that, like, somebody who is suffering from chronic depression is in a very different situation than somebody who you would say has good mental health, experienced a bout of acute depression, and was able to come out of it. Those are incredibly different things. And to compare them or to equate them is unfair and sort of, again, it continues to perpetuate the problem that you can just fix it given enough time, or work on your character flaw of laziness, and then you'll be able to solve your other problems.
Yeah, it's it's also one of those things that a lot of the people who have suffered an acute episode of something, be it depression or anxiety or what, were fortunate that they ended up having some sort of support system in place that provided that avenue to be able to go forward. And they're not aware enough of the presence of that support system to understand it, much less understand the difference between an acute episode and chronic attacks.
I remember seeing this thing that was popular. I felt like it was popular among mental health professionals. I don't know. I heard it from a mental health professional. And the idea was that if you felt like you wanted to kill yourself today and realized that you wouldn't feel that way forever, that might be helpful in getting past whatever it is that is making you feel that way today. But then I heard someone say, well, yeah, but that might be the case, but I keep cycling in and out of this over and over and over again. And when you cycle through this so many times, you get to the point where, like, I'm done with the cycle. I know I'll feel better, but I'll be back feeling bad again. And so I feel like there's we stepped out a little bit and we say, oh, look at the big picture. And then we need to step out a little bit more and say, oh, this is the bigger picture. And then it's like, we got to keep learning things, and we have to keep expanding our knowledge so that we can try to understand the even bigger picture.
I can understand that, but it seems a little misguided to me, and I'll explain why. If you are in a state of mind where you feel like it's the end and you can't see a way out, how realistic do you think it will be for that person to have a thought that they'll feel better at some point in the future that's indeterminate? I think that's where it breaks down. Because if you're in the middle of not even at the middle, if you're anywhere in a state of intense depression, intense anxiety, suicidal thoughts, if you're anywhere in a negative state, more likely than not, you're not going to see anything or recognize anything outside of that state. And you're definitely not going to think of, oh, well, maybe I won't feel this way tomorrow. Because that's not generally the way it works. You're not focused on tomorrow. You're focused on how horrible something feels in that moment. And you have no cognitive way to see beyond that moment. I think it's the difference between a sense of depression in a very mild general sense for someone who maybe has never experienced it before versus the onset of a very continuous spiraling descent further and further into a depressed state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm just sitting here thinking about, like, I'm so out of my realm here because, like, I have not experienced that. Earlier in the shows I talked about, feeling like, seasonal. I don't even remember what the A stands for. I don't remember anything.
Affective?
Yeah, seasonally affective disorder, and I can remember going through, like, looking back, I was like, oh, I suffered from a bout of acute depression. It was, and this is like, like a 6-week thing. So I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what it's like to suffer from these issues. So all I can say is,
this is an area that unfortunately I feel fairly well versed in, both from a theoretical standpoint, from academia, and from personal experience.
I was thinking, what I do know is that we don't treat mental health the way we should. We don't treat it as part of it should be part of it's often a physical problem. It's something that should be treated by the right professionals, and it's something that should be considered the same as any sort of wound or other physical damage.
I would take it a step further. I mean, we have
I was about to too,
okay.
But you go ahead. You go ahead.
But we have preventative health, or the concept of preventative health and living a healthy lifestyle on the physical side. Why is there nothing equivalent to that for our emotional and mental well-being?
I mean, it costs money, and that's apparently a problem for folks. And if you think that you can just take care of it on your own, then why would we spend money on that? That's part of it. But
the other part of it is, how do you typically view someone who I've had a yearly or biannual physical versus, I went to see a counselor? There's a stigma.
What's wrong with you? Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a stigma attached to the counselor, and there shouldn't be.
No.
Anyone who recognizes that they need to talk through something with a professional should absolutely talk through something with a professional. And even if they don't recognize it, if they just say that, every year I want to have somewhere between 1 and half a dozen conversations with someone who can help make sure that I am not doing something detrimental from a mental standpoint, more power to you. It should absolutely be something that you feel comfortable doing and not judged for.
Yeah, it's unfortunately that we look for the obvious things where you should seek that kind of assistance and that sort of wellness. And I know, after my father passed away, a number of folks, rightly so, suggested or made sure that I was talking to somebody. And I appreciate my friends who did come to me with that concern and that sort of direction, because it was incredibly helpful to talk to somebody about those things in that time. Even when it felt like it wasn't helpful, the idea of I need to at least be aware that I'm going through some stuff right now. So
yeah, I have a follow-up example that kind of illustrates the point a bit further too, that I figure I'll see if I can summarize in a way that doesn't pinpoint anybody. But I have a friend who was suffering just a number of life circumstances affected him in a way that sent him into an intensely depressed, suicidal state. And it did not help that he had been on had basically overconsumed alcohol for a period of time leading up to this point, to a point where that further fueled the depressive state. And familial issues as well, as far as divorce and custody battle and other things, that a lot of things all together. And a mutual friend was rightly concerned, reached out to me and was trying to figure out how to assist because of their at least close proximity, as opposed to my rather removed proximity from a geographical perspective. And this mutual friend, the first thing they focused on was what kind of past trauma had to drive this type of behavior. They couldn't wrap their head around the idea that not everything stems from childhood trauma. Sometimes it's just shit luck in the moment, right? Or
it's the trauma that just happened to you.
Yeah. And they were very much fixated on whether there had to be something in the past that triggered this. And I think that really illustrates the mindset that has invaded most of our society as a result of not understanding everything as a whole. Number one, like that mental health in general is not understood well outside of the people who either directly experience it or are professionals in the field, because of the way everything is portrayed in crime dramas. That's where most people get their exposure to some level of psychological evaluation, and it's dramatized. It's intended to be that edge case, or edge case isn't quite right, because there are legitimate reasons that criminal behaviors could be linked to past trauma, but that's the focal point. And instead of recognizing that there's this narrow subset of potential criminal behaviors that could be influenced, and emphasize could be influenced or driven by past traumas, but they want to extrapolate that to everyday behavior instead of it being that focused criminal behavior. And all of that is driven from a misunderstanding of mental health, and the misunderstanding is driven by the stigma associated with seeking out assistance. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. It's if it's kind of like, well, here's the obvious thing that's going to tackle you from the front, and don't forget about this one that's going to tackle you from behind as well. Like it's an onslaught and from every direction.
Yeah, and of course that none of that is to say that there may not be other scenarios where similar things are driven from past experience compounded by present situations, and it's technically the whole concept of what causes a person to snap, so to speak. Especially when you look at criminal behavior. But the bigger picture is that it doesn't have to be trauma. It doesn't have to be neglect. It doesn't have to be somebody else's fault. It can be that you just found yourself on the receiving end of some bad situations back to back, and you didn't have the ability to cope or the support system necessary to see the next step. And that was the breaking point.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's that's probably more often the problem than it is some childhood trauma. I don't want to downplay childhood trauma, because we all get messed up in our own ways, some more than others. But that doesn't mean that you can't have something that is wholly created in your adult life that happened in the past 6 months.
Right.
Or you have a combination of like this happened recently, and something that happened to me when I was a child exacerbated the result, like the result of my response.
And I certainly wasn't trying to downplay it either. One of the more fascinating fields of study that is relatively new, or I guess it's not really a field, but biosocial criminology. It recognizes that the question of nature versus nurture is the wrong question. Some things are absolutely genetically influenced. Some things are absolutely the product of our environment. And it goes further than that, because specific environmental influences can trigger specific genetic influences.
Like epigenetics.
Yeah. And so the concept of biosocial criminology is to say, okay, instead of focusing on psychology or criminology or sociology or neurology, let's take what all of us have learned, let's see where things correlate. And if we can figure out some of the things that might help us find commonalities, hopefully it will lead to better, treatments, dispositions, etc. But if nothing else, maybe it will help us at least understand the ways in which events compound to create negative outcomes. And it's a fascinating field. So anybody who has any interest in it whatsoever, certainly, look it up. But it's well beyond the scope of, of what we should delve into tonight.
Yeah, and that is why we should take away police officers' guns.
It's one of those things that I'll add a quick note there. I don't think in the United States we can take away firearms for law enforcement.
We can't even take it away from citizens.
Well, that's kind of the point. Like, as long as the citizens of an area, regardless of whether it's state by state or what, in this case it's a countrywide thing, but as long as you have the probability of a significant number of members of society having a weapon, then any agency tasked with any level of law enforcement has to also have access to a weapon. I mean, it's pretty simple.
And as we've seen, that's certainly been a two-edged sword.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I see both sides. I'm not someone who would say that you can't have my guns, unless I'm dead. No, if you can make it safe and, at least difficult to obtain firearms, and we can account for most of the ones that are out there, and sure, let's get rid of them. It's going to take away the fun of, blowing something up as a hobby on the side.
Sure.
But that's not, I'll just shoot a paintball gun. I don't care.
I mean, I used to, I don't know that I planted my flag so firmly in the let's get rid of guns. I certainly think that's well, I don't understand, I don't understand why we keep having these shootings. I don't know that it's a gun problem. I don't know if it's a mental health problem. But what I do know is that we don't know those things, and we don't know those things because our bought and paid for government won't allow us to study those things. So my go-to now, or my position now is such that it's I want to know what's going on. To me, what's more important is the data. And why aren't you letting us collect the data? And why can't we have any significant studies that shows us what's actually happening?
It's video games rotting their minds, right?
No, that's more Fox News right there.
Yeah. So I have a number of theories there, but I think we could spend a lot of time on that as well. I will give a very brief synopsis, though, of my thought there. I don't think we have a gun problem. I think what we've been talking about with regard to the stigma associated with mental health is part of the root cause. Because if we were more willing to accept any level of assistance from others to make sure that we're not being detrimental to ourselves, we would find ourselves in a much better situation.
That's not something you can disagree with.
I know.
You're absolutely correct.
There are a lot of reasons I hold that theory, though. And that summary doesn't necessarily do it justice, but I do feel like, though,
it's more nuanced.
Our combination of lack of access to assistance across the board, whether it's just individual assistance for an emotional issue or a mental issue, or in many cases, assistance for a physical issue. I mean, healthcare is cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So not even not even keeping it narrow or a narrow scope on the stigma associated with, seeking out assistance, but just access to assistance being a barrier is part of the problem. You compound that with such a strong sense of you should be able to do it yourself. And it's no wonder that you find people in a really bad mental or emotional state, or just sheer anger and wanting to lash out at whatever group they feel have caused their pain. Those all go hand in hand. And in those scenarios, I don't think it matters so much what the weapon is. I think if it wasn't an ease of access to firearms, it would just be that we hear more about stabbings or bludgeonings than we do shootings. It's just that we have easier access to firearms than most other places.
Totally. Like the AR-15 is a red herring. Far more people are killed with handguns every year than assault rifles. And if we had access to RPGs, well, we'd hear about how we need to ban RPGs. So, like, the AR-15 is a red herring, and I'm not saying it's good, but the American dream, like the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, neglects to talk about the American reality. And the American reality is that there's a lot of things that are stacked against you to keep you right where you are.
I think that's a good way to summarize it.
We have a modern caste system that gives you the idea of being able to rise above. It allows you to think that maybe you can reincarnate into a new social level, a new economic level. But there's so much stacked against you that you kind of have to be in the right place at the right time doing the right thing.
I almost don't want to say anything else because I think that's a good summary.
Okay. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.